Welcome to the Functional Medicine Doc Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kurt Woeller, talking with experts in functional and integrative health and medicine, discussing critical information for improving your health and wellness to help you live a long, full life. Let's get to it. Hi, this is Dr. Kurt Woeller, and in this episode, I have a conversation with Scott Mattivi. Scott is the CEO of Mosaic Diagnostics Laboratory. This is a lab that I am very familiar with and have used for years, particularly their organic acids test, but many other tests as well. And Scott has years of experience in the laboratory world, coming from the traditional laboratory space into the functional medicine space, heading up Mosaic as we move forward in this evolving and emerging field of functional and integrative medicine. Now, this episode of Functional Medicine Doc Talk is proudly sponsored by Mosaic Diagnostics, a global pioneer in specialty diagnostic testing, whose mission is focused on restoring health by addressing the root cause of complex chronic disease. Here is my interview with Scott Mattivi. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Kurt. Pleasure to be here.
So I'm very familiar with Great Plains Laboratory. In fact, it's really where I got my start in this world of functional integrative medicine, and now running your test really all the time in clinical practice. But as CEO of Mosaic, we're going to talk more about functional medicine testing. But I know you also come from the traditional medical laboratory side of things. So I think you have over 3 decades of experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, happy to tell you about it. We're a specialty testing laboratory in the Kansas City area. We've been around for almost 30 years, formerly Great Plains Laboratory, and we help practitioners and patients with functional medicine assays that we run in our lab.
So explain what reference lab is. So I know that you had worked for Quest Diagnostics, and people who are running lab tests will usually in the United States know about Quest Diagnostics and LabCorp. So what is a reference laboratory?
It sure is, Kurt. Yeah, I actually started my career in 1987 as a med tech. At least we used to call ourselves med techs. Now we call ourselves clinical lab scientists and every variety of things, but have been in the lab industry since then, almost exclusively in the reference lab space. So I've been around what I would call traditional laboratory for 35, 36 years, and just recently in the functional medicine space as I took over as CEO in December of last year here at Mosaic.
So what was your role at Quest Diagnostics?
Everything starting with being a bench tech at Quest Diagnostics and then moving into management, and ultimately had management over the entirety of the laboratory. So every discipline within the lab ultimately fell under my management and my leadership. So I got to see everything, to include toxicology testing as well, because we had a tox lab, but of course all the traditional laboratory tests on the clinical side. So it was a very large place. We had about 3,000 employees by the time I left there, and got to learn a whole lot about lab business while I was there at Quest.
So being now in the functional integrative med space, I'm just curious, do you know of, or some of these large reference labs, are they themselves starting to do functional testing, or are they still pretty much on the traditional category side of the equation?
Yeah, we have heard that LabCorp is getting into it here just recently. So there was some news a couple of weeks ago that LabCorp is dipping their toe in. I do know that other large reference labs are looking into functional medicine as well. It's basically become such a hot area of healthcare that they can't ignore it. And, they've sort of stayed away from it because, they don't likely want to offend maybe their traditional medicine and traditional lab business partners by getting into functional medicine, because in some ways they're seen as competitors. But also with that said, just the way the area is growing and the demand that people are putting on functional medicine is just going to make it inevitable where they will get involved with it.
When I look back, so I started practice in the late 90s, around 98 or so, and there wasn't a lot of lab tests back then. So a lot of times when we did do blood testing, it was through LabCorp or Quest. And I remember early on, particularly some of the nutritional work I was doing, is we would use traditional testing and apply it in a more holistic or functional way. It really wasn't called functional medicine back then, but you can look at a blood chemistry panel. And if you understand the chemistry and look at things from a nutritional standpoint, you could start to build a much broader or deeper assessment of somebody and with regards to their health issues, whether it's looking at liver function or other factors on a more traditional blood test, and apply it in a functional medicine way. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, you had to do the best you could with the tools you had available to you, and fortunately, there are much more specific tools and tests available to you now that didn't exist then. The other thing that I found that's really interesting is even some of those more traditional tests, such as thyroid tests and things of that nature, not being looked at as a traditional physician would look at it in terms of, is the result in normal range? Yes, but is it in the optimal range? Maybe not. And that's been my own experience a bit in going to see my own functional med doc. He's like, yeah, your result is in the normal range, but it's not where it should be for you to have, to feel as well as you could if it were in the optimal range. So that's what I found really interesting about functional medicine myself with my own journey.
Well, and that's right. I mean, thyroid is a perfect example of that, because a lot of times, even with some of the medical textbooks you read, they only look at a lot of times just TSH, and then they forget about, T4 or T3 or even the free fractions of those particular hormones. And there's always been a lot of controversy over TSH. Many times the reference ranges are probably too broad. And from what your functional medicine doctor is getting at is like, hey, yeah, it's normal from the reference range standpoint, but not technically optimal. So very interesting. And you also worked for a company. I don't know if you worked for the company or started it, Scott, you can tell me, called Pathology Watch. What was that?
Yeah, Pathology Watch was a little startup that I went to work for a couple of years ago. It was a company that did dermatopathology exclusively. So we had 3 labs around the country where people would get their biopsies taken and sent in to us, and we would do traditional dermatopathology, of course, staining and preparing the tissues and creating slides for the pathologist to read. But what was unique about Pathology Watch is we developed a best-in-class AI tool that read the slide at the same time as the pathologist reading the slide. And the pathologist always had the final call on the ultimate readout. But what our tool did was it could alert them if they missed something as they entered their diagnosis codes. And so they might see a basal cell and be ready to call a basal cell. And the tool could actually say, hey, yes, there is a basal cell, but look at this region of the slide. You may have missed something more important like a melanoma. And we have stories and case studies from pathologists where this is exactly what happened, is that it saved someone's life by catching something that the pathologist did not. So it gave the pathologist such a feeling of comfort of knowing that they basically had belt and suspenders, as they were reading these things and weren't going to miss something. Plus the fact that they could read them all digitally. They didn't have to go somewhere to read them. They could read them from the comfort of their office, wherever that may be, whether it be a home office or a medical building office. The other thing that was so powerful about that was the ability to have someone else take a look at it. So when some of these are very tricky, and they might want another pathologist to have a look just so they could concur on the actual diagnosis. And obviously, it's very simple to do that when it's completely digitized. You just email or text somebody and say, if you have access to this, take a look at it. And what do you see? So it was just a super powerful tool. Ultimately, we were acquired by Sonic Healthcare. Sonic Healthcare had been developing their own version of such a tool, but they had run into multiple roadblocks and struggled with it. And when they came and saw ours, they were like, yep, that's what we need. And that's what we've been trying to build. And we could continue to build our own, probably taking a couple more years to get it done. Or we could buy you guys, and we have it today. So they did buy us about a year and a half ago. And so I was part of Sonic Healthcare for about 6 months. But large organizations move a little too slowly for me. So I like going back to the smaller organizations, which is where I am now.
Wow. So I can see that technology crossing over to a lot of other areas in radiology, and just imaging.
Absolutely.
So is pathology, is that technology now pretty widespread from a dermatological standpoint?
It is. There are competitors as well that have developed similar tools, but again, and not just because it was our tool, but we know that the tool that we developed is best in class because we've been told that by independent, agencies. Of course, Sonic Healthcare being one of them. They could have bought us, they could have bought others, but when they saw ours, they were convinced that this was absolutely the best in the world, and so they did buy us. But to your point about using it, elsewhere, of course, even other types of cancer, of course, but it could be used in any number of ways to help augment the analysis and the readout of lab tests, especially the ones that are more subjective, such as dermatopathology.
You also did some work in the biopharmaceutical industry as well.
Sure did.
What was that about?
Yeah, we ran the clinical trials testing group for Eurofins Viracor there in Kansas City area as well, and it was quite a run. We really had an interesting business there. Probably the thing that's most relevant that listeners may be interested in is we ran Moderna's phase 2 and 3 clinical trial for, of course, the COVID vaccine. And I can mention that because they mentioned us publicly as well. And, of course, these pharma companies keep their information exceptionally close and tight. But since they called us out publicly and thanked us publicly for running and getting those trials done, I'm able to mention their name. But, the team that I was able to do that with, some of those folks are now on my team at Mosaic, and I'm very happy to have them over there. Really, I can't say enough about these professionals. You talk about people that can get it done when literally nothing works. You don't have logistics, you don't have materials, you don't have space, you don't have people, you don't have equipment. But it's like, hey, guess what? The world is counting on you to get this done. So, the pressure was immense. We literally worked a year without really having a day off. What were you going to do anyway if you had a day off?
Right.
You weren't going to go anywhere and do anything. So we just worked. We didn't know what day of the week it was or time of the day, but we worked to get through it. And that wasn't the only one. We were running multiple COVID trials, of course, at the same time, and I can't mention the other ones by the company name, but suffice it to say it was far and away the busiest year of my life, but also far and away the most proud moment of my life, specifically because of the team that I was able to do that with, and the bonding that we had together will never leave us. We will always have that to remember. And now, again, as I said, some of those folks are working with me here at Mosaic, and I couldn't be happier than to have them on the team. And
I want to come back to that in a second because I'm thinking about your history in the lab and all the different things involved, and your education and experience and growth and hard work and working with other individuals, and then the biopharmaceutical side of things. So that's going to blend, I think, very importantly into your leadership role at Mosaic Diagnostics. But I'm curious, coming from this traditional world, what attracted you to functional medicine? Why make that change at this point in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would have to say that, in all honesty, the functional medicine piece of it was the piece that I honestly had to convince myself of a bit, because again, you spend almost 40 years in the traditional side of things, and I'd heard about functional medicine from a few years ago, and it's like, is this a real thing or not? And what drew me to Mosaic was the fact that it was a smaller company, that it was in the Kansas City area, which is home to me. I don't live in Kansas City full time anymore. I live in Colorado, but I do spend half my time in Kansas City in my role as CEO of Mosaic. But knowing that I would be able to come back to a setting like that in an area where I don't need a GPS to get around Kansas City when I come into town, I would be able to attract and recruit some of my former star teammates that I wanted to have on the team. And then the functional medicine piece was the piece that I had to learn more about. And, I started like everybody else. What I say, Kurt, is I kind of started as a skeptic, and now I'm an evangelist, and in fairly short order. And, really, I shouldn't have been quite as much of a skeptic, maybe going into it as I can. And I'm not going to say that I was, that I didn't believe in it at all. But my own wife had been seeing a functional med doc for several years, and I saw what they were able to do for her. And it was life-changing. And honestly, the improvements that she got through the treatment and the interactions that she had suggested by her functional med doc, was very real to me, because I was living with her every day and saw how much her life improved as a part of that. And then myself, as I was moving into this role, it's like, you know what, I have some chronic issues. I'm 62 years old, everything hurts and I don't have enough energy and all those things. I thought I'm going to find, go see a doctor myself. So of course I went and saw my wife's doctor here in the Colorado Springs area. And, next thing you know, he's like, we're going to run some tests on you that are going to be sent to Mosaic. And, we're going to take a read of those tests and see what you got going on. And happy to report, a few months in, I am feeling much better, much more energy, sleeping better. It's changed my life as well. So, as I said, going from somewhat of a skeptic to an evangelist in a relatively short amount of time, and just so many stories I've heard, Kurt, from people that are, substantial players in the space. Their own personal journeys have just been incredibly compelling. The things that they were dealing with and suffering with, and traditional medicine was not helping them. And being able to address those things through functional medicine, changing their lives, it basically, created a lifelong mission for these folks. And these are some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met. So again, this is not a fringe thing whatsoever. It is a very real thing, and that's why you're seeing the explosive growth that you're seeing right now.
Well, one of the things about functional integrative medicine that I've always looked at from the standpoint is, as a DO and, licensed physician, you go through medical school, you go through your traditional training, and you go through rotations and then postgraduate training. And so you're exposed to a wide variety of things. But it's really the way you think or approach a particular health problem. And so the functional medicine testing just reveals another set of information. It maybe looks at things in a different way or presents things in a different way. It doesn't discount traditional lab testing. It just, from a functional standpoint, we have to start digging deeper and start looking at the interconnections between the immune system, the digestive system, the endocrine system, the detoxification systems. I mean, those are really the cornerstones of functional medicine. And then integrative medicine means, at least the way I view it and approach it, is I'm integrating a wide variety of different available interventions. That might be a medication for a particular person, or it might be botanicals, or it might be a dietary intervention. But we're integrating all of what we have and really expanding our viewpoint. So I call it sometimes sort of pulling the lens back and looking at things from a much broader standpoint. Traditional medicine has become so specialized that I think a lot of doctors get very tunnel vision. And when a patient presents in a certain way that doesn't fit their specialty or what they consider to be inside their box, they're not really sure what to do. And so really, as a functional integrative physician and healthcare practitioner, I believe it's our duty to push ourselves and be involved as much as possible to a much greater degree and a much broader degree. So I'm thrilled that you are sitting in this position at Mosaic, having actually come from that traditional world, now starting to recognize within yourself and your family, and then seeing individuals who are using this kind of testing about how transformative it can be. So that's awesome. So what is your vision for Mosaic Diagnostics?
Yeah, my vision has been and always will be, how do we help the most patients and practitioners that we possibly can? I mean, everything we do and every thought that we have is how we help more people. And ultimately what I find is by always having that at the forefront of our vision, we will do the right things for the right reasons, and always, again, service the most number of people that we can. And not necessarily the most number of people, but the people that we do serve them well. And we want to lead with science. We want to make sure that the tests that we have always are the most robust that they can be, that they're the most relevant that they can be, that they're going to provide the most information, the most useful information to the practitioner that they possibly can. And with that will come, growth. The business side of things will happen. But we don't focus on the business needs to be this size, therefore we have to do those things. It's just, how do we get a channel to more people that we can help? And with those thoughts in mind, the business will grow as well.
So that was one of the questions I had too, was, we can see certain labs, what appears to be sort of growing exponentially. It's almost like the lab menus become so large that I wonder, from your experience now, having come from the traditional lab world at Quest and Pathology Watch, these other things you've been involved in, can a company or a lab grow too quickly? Not maybe grow too quickly, but maybe expand in areas that maybe they're not prepared for, that they can't necessarily service? I mean, is there some things that you've seen along the way that where that could become a problem?
Absolutely. I mean, I come from laboratories that had, I guess I would call them SKUs of, over 2,000 tests on our menus, whereas here at Mosaic, we basically have a handful of tests. Now, those tests are highly multiplexed and lots of markers on those tests, but still, the actual number of tests that we run is a handful. And I think it's much more important to be able to go deep into the areas of expertise that you have than it is trying to be all things to all people. I think you definitely dilute yourself a bit when you try to have a super broad menu, as opposed to being able to speak with scientific rigor around those things that you do all day, every day. Certainly we saw it during COVID, where so many labs popped up and, we're trying to do COVID testing. And, some of those labs, I would have been afraid to have my sample go there, because people were just trying to hurry up and do a money grab. And with the growth that you're seeing in functional medicine space, you are seeing folks come along that appear to be, on the surface at least, less scrupulous. They are just trying to grab onto the growth of the space, and you'll never see us do that. We will grow appropriately, but we will also grow in a controlled manner such that we can handle what it is that we're taking on. The group that I have in the laboratory right now, at least a handful of them that I'm bringing in, are to help me really scale the laboratory appropriately. We have to automate, and we have to do some things that do allow the lab to scale, but you have to do them properly. It's not about cutting jobs whatsoever. In fact, we won't cut any jobs based on automating some of our workflows, but we will do things better, more consistently, more reliably, with the highest of quality by automating some of these functions in the laboratory.
So and tell me if I'm wrong with this, Scott, but one of the ways that I maybe think of, when I think of a larger reference lab, for example, there's huge menus of tests that can be ordered. Now, not all of them are being ordered, continuously. There's going to be some that get ordered quite a bit by doctors, and maybe others are more specialized. And so there's more room for a larger menu of things because they're less nuanced, for example, in how they're applied clinically. In the functional medicine space, I can imagine you run into a situation as a lab that's adding more and more tests, is how do you support the practitioner in understanding what those tests mean clinically? Because one of the things that I've been involved with for many years now is education, not only of patients, but working with other practitioners, getting them to understand what some of these tests are about. And the organic acid test is a test I've used for years, and a complicated test because there's so many markers to it. So I'm assuming, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that one of the major pitfalls that a lab could fall into, as you just alluded to, is adding way too much to the menu and not being able to support it.
No, absolutely right, Kurt. I mean, there's just no way that you can be as well versed on the tests that you only run infrequently. Typically what you find is you might have one or two people, even in a large laboratory like the large reference labs that we spoke about earlier. If you have a test that you run very infrequently, a lot of times it's one or two people that are comfortable and confident to run those tests. And then what happens is ultimately that person goes away. And so you can see operator to operator or technologist to technologist differences. And sometimes when those folks go away, the test can really fall into peril because the person that knew how to, turn the dials, if you will, of the test to make it work like it was supposed to traditionally, when they go away, sometimes that knowledge goes out the door with them. I do want to mention, too, that at most of these larger laboratories, much of their menu is what would be called an IVD or an in vitro diagnostic FDA cleared test. So these are tests that were developed by the large names that you hear about, Roche, Abbott, Siemens, these guys that develop these methods, and they give you the equipment, the reagents, and basically the entire test system. And it literally is highly automated at that point in time and very, very foolproof. The tests on our menu and other laboratories like us, a lot of those are lab developed tests or LDTs. So the test and the technology was developed at Mosaic, in some cases many years ago, in some cases just a few years ago on some of our newer tests, but developed with the same rigor that you would if you were going to present these tests to the FDA for them to take a look at the validations and make sure that everything you're doing is up to standards and the rigor that is used against these IVDs as the larger players go to get those tests approved.
So at a larger lab, like the reference labs, are they as focused on the public education? Are they really just geared towards the practitioner or the physicians themselves who's ordering the labs? As opposed to what you see in the functional space is seems to be a lot of emphasis too on helping to educate the public about what these tests are about and what kind of information they can provide.
Yeah, that's a really great call out, Kurt. It's very different. So at the larger reference labs, there is a fair amount of education, but it's typically in the form of things that are prepackaged on the website and things of that nature, or just things that the customer service reps are able to regurgitate when someone calls in asking about something. But with functional medicine laboratories, especially like ours, we have a whole team of clinical educators because, as you mentioned, our tests are complicated. These health problems are complex. You have to be able to really peel back the onion and look at these tests in such a way that not a single result is going to give you the answer that you need. You have to be able to look at results in groups and in connection with one another and be able to really put that whole picture together with how that patient is presenting. So we have an entire team of folks that are doctorate level that are on the phones all day, every day, answering these calls for our practitioners and patients sometimes, just to help them understand our test results. What does this test mean? What is some additional testing that you might do? What are some courses of treatment that may make sense? Of course, we don't guide treatment decisions. That's always up to the practitioner. But we do try to make the test results make sense through the use of this clinical educator team that we have.
Well, I hope you realize, and I think you do, Scott, having come over from the traditional world now into this functional integrative medicine world as CEO, how important that is, that Mosaic, and what you're involved in is helping to educate the public, because the public is starving for information. There's a lot of people out there struggling, and there's a lot of smart people out there just trying to figure out what's going on with them or a loved one. So that knowing that you guys are there and the role that you're playing is critically important. I'm assuming you're hearing some stories. I know as CEO, you have meetings and you're probably getting, things, coming to you from people who are employed there. But I know I hear it on my end and have for years. So I just want you to know that.
Oh, no question, Kurt. I mean, again, I've already mentioned my wife and myself, but there, I have other family members and friends, and I hear their complaints or I hear their, what's going on with them. And I'm like, man, you've been doing the same thing to try to deal with this for a decade now. It's like, why would you not give this a shot? Because literally, what do you have to lose? So, I mean, I have a very recent situation with one of my family members where I've had these same conversations, and finally they've hit enough of a wall with traditional medicine and the frustration that they've had there that they've actually both got appointments to go see a functional med doc here very soon. So I said, I promise you they can help you, or at the very least help you understand what's going on that is making you feel this poorly, because these are people that don't smoke, they're not overweight, they're not terribly old, or it's just like you should not be as unhealthy as you are based on where you are with everything else in your health picture. And there's got to be something that's going on either in your gut or things you're being exposed to that are making you feel this badly. And but sometimes convincing your own family members is more difficult than talking to a complete stranger, as you know. That's just kind of human nature. But finally did wear them down, and I'm very hopeful that they're going to get some relief here over the next couple months as they get started with their functional med docs.
Mosaic Diagnostics, a global pioneer in specialty diagnostic testing, is on a mission to restore health by addressing the root cause of complex chronic disease. For nearly 30 years, they've designed a robust test portfolio that is backed by cutting-edge testing, expert clinical support, and practical resources, empowering practitioners to develop personalized care strategies that transform patients' lives. Learn more at mosaicdx.com.
So another question I had for you is, when we think about medicine, most people focus, from a mentorship standpoint on doctors, the treating doctor, the doctor that diagnosed something. And I think as I was thinking about this interview, we often overlook those behind the scenes, those who develop the technology of lab testing or who are working in the lab who discover something quite significant. They're sort of the silent heroes in many regards. And I'm curious, are there certain individuals, maybe there's one in your history, you look back over the years that was pivotal in your career that you feel really brought something significant to the world that you look back on with gratitude?
Yeah, there are, everyone has mentors, and I've been fortunate enough to have a number of them over the years. And I really learned early in my career from a mentor that I had as a young med tech. At first getting out of school, it's just like need a job, need to make some money and have a little bit of fun at work. But I really didn't understand the gravity of the work that we did because, again, sometimes as a reference lab, you're so detached from the patient. We're not going upstairs and drawing their blood and bringing it downstairs to the laboratory as you would if you worked in a hospital. So we're a bit detached from the patient. So that patient connection for me was a little bit of a challenge early on because I started my career right out in the reference lab world. But I had a mentor who ended up being our lab manager and ultimately was president of the company by the name of Roy Vance, that was just such a mentor to me and others and just really helped me understand the importance of the work that we were doing. And I'm really glad that you mentioned the unsung heroes because the laboratorians that I work with and around all day, every day, when I get to see them, I don't get to see them as often as I used to when I did work in the lab every day, but I always spend time in the lab when I go to Kansas City to Mosaic every other week. And I spend time with these folks. I walk around and talk to these folks. They are hidden away. You never hear about them. You think about doctors, nurses, practitioners, things like that. No one really ever mentions the lab folks. But the lab folks are the unsung heroes that really get it done all day, every day, oftentimes working long hours, difficult physical work. They're on their feet all day, every day, much like nurses are as well. But they know that they have to get those results out so that those diagnoses and that pieces of information can get where they need to go so that treatment can happen and help these patients. So those are my heroes. When I see these folks, I care so much about these laboratorians because I know what their life is like, having been one for many, many years. And their jobs are not easy, and they do not get the recognition that they really should. And so really pleased to hear that you mentioned them. Yeah,
it's something that, again, I wanted to ask you, having come from that world, because I've not worked within a lab. In medical school, I was exposed to that. I was always on the other side of the equation. When I think back in my career about individuals who, a little bit unique because they also were sort of public figures too. One of them was Bill Shaw, Dr. William Shaw, who started Great Plains Lab, and quite an innovator with what he discovered and the labs that he came up with, particularly the organic acid test, but there's others as well. And was really instrumental in my career and really my first, really honestly, got my first exposures to functional integrative medicine, even though it wasn't called that back then. It was within the autism community. I'd gone to a conference, heard Dr. Shaw speak, heard about this thing called the organic acid test. I ran the test, was overwhelmed by all the information. I had a consult with him. He kind of walked me through it, and then sort of things kind of grew from there over the years. And around the same time, in my early part of my career, there was another individual by the name of Bill Timmons, and he was a naturopathic doctor, brilliant guy, and he started a laboratory called BioHealth Laboratory in San Diego. And he was one of the first, at least in my memory, that mentioned this term functional medicine. He really kind of, I think, really sort of set the stage for what that meant from the standpoint of looking at immunology, digestive system, endocrinology, detoxification. And his lab was really geared towards salivary testing for hormones, and then he got into immunology and got into gut function. So when I look back, I really look at those two particular individuals of not only having great importance in my life and my career, but honestly, from the beginnings of functional integrative medicine. I mean, those two individuals for me really stand out. So, yeah, interesting for sure.
Yeah, Dr. Shaw, just real quickly before we move on, is just an amazing individual. He still comes into the lab just about every day at Mosaic, and I get the opportunity to run into him when I'm there periodically. I got to introduce him to my wife when she was in town a couple of weeks ago as well. And you talk about someone who's revered in the space, and in many ways is the father of this testing from, again, going back nearly 30 years ago now. It's amazing to be able to just be around him, hear some of his stories when he talks about patients and kids that with autism especially, that he was able to help, and his passion for, us needing to be able to find these kids earlier so that we can take interventions and potentially, make them better through the testing and the interventions that are done. So it's a real honor and a real pleasure to be around him, and I can see why he would be one of your mentors as well.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for having gone to that conference and met him and consulted with him, and then over the years working, alongside him, not in the lab, but just from an educational standpoint, the out seminars, other conferences, et cetera. So yeah, very, very important figure in this particular world. So let's talk about Mosaic and some of the innovations of Mosaic. So we know that functional medicine is really going more mainstream, and it's going there quickly. And so what Mosaic is involved, some of the innovation that your lab is involved in?
Yeah, as I sort of mentioned briefly earlier, some of the things we're looking at are automating some of the processes that today are very manual. The laboratory still relies heavily on hands and feet to get things done, which we're always going to need. As I said, this isn't about, we're not automating to try to cut people by any stretch, but we have to be able to intake information more digitally than we ever have before. So we really are pushing people more to digitize their orders and results. Of course, we have a very good portal, but we still have a fair number of people that send in paper requisitions, and we always will have paper requisitions. So we're actually working on a project right now to be able to digest that information, digitize it, do it in such a way that it's much more accurate than the human that can do it. We're looking at robotic systems to also help us sort and rack our samples in an automated manner, as opposed to doing all of that manually as well. And then just automation in the laboratory itself to either automate the front end preparation of samples for testing, or in some cases, even automate the testing process itself. So I did bring in a person by the name of Matt Waters to be our automation specialist right when I got to Mosaic, because I could tell this is something we're going to need. Matt had experience doing this for us at ViraCore, and so Matt is now going about the business of helping us automate many of the methods in the laboratory. So automating methods that we're doing already, and then of course, as we build new methods, building those with automation and scalability in mind from the get-go, as opposed to thinking, we're only going to ever run a handful of these tests. Because, when you put a new test on your menu, it doesn't usually start out gangbusters. It usually starts relatively slow. But I always tell my people, don't think in orders of being able to do twice as many of whatever it is you do. Think about orders of doing, what would I have to do 10 times as many? And I said, and don't ever think of that as run 10 times as hard. That's never the answer. That's the recipe for disaster if you ask people to run themselves into the ground. So you have to give them tools and processes and things of that nature where they can do them reasonably. In fact, generally do them easier through automation that is smartly implemented.
So robotics, I mean, that's interesting. Are robotics used, a lot now in labs? I mean, from a laboratory technician standpoint, I mean, is that what's happening?
Yeah, robotics. I mean, there are robotic platforms of all types. I mean, sometimes robotic platforms that deliver samples around the laboratory. So it can be a robot that actually brings things from point A to point B, or usually point A to point B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on and so forth. And that's done in a number of different ways. But then you also have robotics where you have a platform that's somewhat fixed in space, but it is able to move samples around, read barcodes, rack them, in such a way that you never lose track of where a sample is or who it belongs to. And then just the robotic of reading, again, paper material, paper requisitions as they come in, digesting that information in such a way that it is now digitized. You can do more with it. It's much more reliable. So yeah, robotics have been used in the laboratory for decades now, frankly, in some form or another. And it's just going to continue to go that route because, quite frankly, you can't hire enough people to do the amount of work that needs to be done. And so, you have to solve it through the use of robotics to be able to keep up and scale your laboratory.
Well, it makes sense because, Great Plains and now Mosaic, I mean, your lab, that's global. I mean, you're sending test kits all over the world. So, which means you're receiving test kits from all over the world.
Yeah, we're in well over 100 countries around the world. So it is a substantial part of our business and something that we are looking to expand upon as well.
So what about AI? Where do you see that in the whole realm of functional integrated medicine from a laboratory standpoint, whether it's test interpretation or application? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, you just sort of mentioned, I think, what are some of the key uses. I mean, AI, of course, is everywhere. You can't have a conversation. You can't go through a day without hearing the term, a dozen times. And AI will definitely be a part of what we do, and is already a part of what you see in functional medicine. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the clinical educator group, and that group will always be extremely important to us. But a lot of what they do, some of these things are transactional in nature. Some of the information that people are looking for could be solved by smart AI that we have developed. So we actually, give you a little bit of a sneak peek, we are working behind the scenes to develop such a tool so that we can help with those interpretations, so we can help make sure that nobody ever goes without getting the information that they need. Sometimes our clinical educators are so busy that they fill up all of their time slots that are available for people to book. And so I know that if they're filling all their time slots, that there are people that are trying to get time slots that are not able to get them scheduled. So one way we can help augment what they're doing is through the use of AI tools that are able to at least be that first level line of triage of helping that practitioner get the information that they need. And then if they need a deeper discussion, deeper information, they can always schedule time with the clinical educators to find out even more. So absolutely, it is something you're already seeing in the space. You will continue to see it, and you will certainly see it from Mosaic in the near future as well.
Well, I think that also is going to lend to just the customer service, benefits of Mosaic and being able to expand in that area, because being a global lab, you're not only doing labs, obviously, for the general public out there, but you're connected to practitioners all over the world. So there's only so many people you can have on staff that you could get scheduled to do lab reviews. And I know, having, stood in front of thousands of practitioners for years teaching those out seminars, I know how complicated some of these tests can be. But it doesn't have to be complicated, because a practitioner doesn't necessarily have to understand every single marker, for example, on some of these more complicated profiles. What you have to do, at least in the beginning, is just to be able to recognize some of the more common markers and how those things fit together, the pattern recognition of these things, and then, ultimately how to quickly apply this thing to a particular clinical setting. So from an AI standpoint, being able to provide even just, I don't want to call it basic, Scott, but foundational, fundamental, really starts to move the process forward. And it sounds to me, from what the type of person you are, the leadership that you're implementing, and the systems that you are implementing and probably have already, is just going to scale that even further.
Yeah, Kurt. I mean, again, we've talked many times today already about the growth of the space and the explosive growth. More and more people are getting into functional medicine every day, and not just from the patient side of things, but from the practitioner and provider side of things. And these folks are brand new to it as well. So they need these types of tools and they need this type of support in order for them to be effective at their jobs, basically. So we do not want to leave them lacking or wanting for information when they need it. And we need to be able to provide that information where and when they need it. And as you mentioned, us being a very international company, I mean, one thing that we deal with is that time zones, of course, around the globe are all very different, and we're not a 24/7 operation at this point in time. So someone that needs response from us at 10 p.m. Can't reach us until the next day if they're an overseas entity. But with AI, they would be able to get that information and get that support when they need it, where they need it.
So you really answered my next question, and that was, what's Mosaic doing to help bridge the gap between testing and clinical action? We just talked about that. It's being able to implement these systems and the AI aspect. I'm really happy you brought up the time zone scenario, because that is really important. I think from a practitioner standpoint, when you have a lab test and it's it could be a Friday and you have a consult on Monday and you can't get a hold of anybody, it could be nerve-wracking because that's a real test. It's a real person sitting in front of you, and you need actionable information. So I'm so happy to hear that. As we wrap this up, Scott, where do you see, from the world that you've come from, the world that you're in now, and being able to see this particular space, and the future of specialty diagnostics is what? How would you frame that moving forward?
Boy, that's a great question, Kurt, and that is the one that, of course, we're always all trying to answer and wish we had a crystal ball. But honestly, though, some of the fun of it is just figuring it out as you go and trying to really see around that corner and try to see at least a little bit in advance what's coming. But certainly this will become more mainstream as we go forward. Again, the public will demand it. The public are demanding it. When you hear names like LabCorp getting into this mix as well, it's only a matter of time before insurance coverage becomes much more broad spread than it is right now. Right now, insurance coverage is very minimal. But again, people are going to demand more coverage. They're going to push providers to have that type of coverage, and the providers will push to make sure that these things are covered. So we need to be in a world where functional medicine is available to the masses just as easily as a cholesterol test or a hemoglobin A1C or a PSA. And I do believe that is the future of what will happen. And I think it's going to come sooner rather than later, just because, again, there's so much demand for this type of approach to things, because traditional medicine has just failed in many ways.
For people listening, so this particular podcast is listened to from patients, the general public, practitioners. What's your message? What kind of message would you like to leave this interview with regards to people listening in?
Again, that's another great question, Kurt. But I think my message would be, first of all, this is very real, and certainly the practitioners that are listening know that already. But patients as well, patients that are skeptical. Maybe you have a friend or a loved one who has seen a functional medicine doc. And even if you haven't, if you're suffering from things that you've been chronically dealing with and you've been frustrated by traditional healthcare not really being able to address those things, please seek out a functional medicine doc that's got, that's in your area, that's someone that has good reviews, or even better yet, someone you know and trust has gone to see them and has had good results with them. You don't have to suffer, and you don't have to live a poorer quality of life. The quality of life as I mentioned very early in this podcast, of myself and my wife, has been greatly enhanced by the fact that we have gone to see functional medicine practitioner and the work that we've done with them. So you don't have to feel bad. There are better ways to look at things, and there's nothing to be ashamed of or weirded out about just because it's a little bit different and a little bit new and cutting edge. It is something that can make you feel better. So I encourage everyone that's listening that either themselves or know someone who's dealing with these types of things to seek out help, because that help is very real and can change lives for the better.
And I would add to that practitioners. So from the standpoint of from a practitioner listening to this who is interested in learning more about functional medicine, integrative medicine, but particularly Mosaic, what's being provided? Where can people reach out to learn more about you guys?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always absolutely reach out to us via our website, mosaicdx.com. You can always schedule time to speak with one of us, one of our practitioners educators that can get on the phone with you. We're happy to have our customer service folks reach out to you and connect you with someone that can put you in touch with us. And I'm always available as well. My name and email and cell phone numbers and my signature block. I want you to be able to get a hold of me if you need to. And I am Mattivi at mosaicdx.com. So reach out to us. We're happy to help you. We're happy to support you. And we want to make sure that, again, what we provide is available to the people that need it.
And you have social media links as well. So Instagram, Facebook.
Sure do.
Any others?
Yep.
Okay.
LinkedIn, of course, as well.
And all this information is going to be on the webpage, Scott, where your bio and the recording for this particular podcast is. This podcast also goes up on Spotify and Apple and Amazon and other podcast platforms. So,
yes.
So fantastic, really important. Your lab is doing great work. You know, going back to the years of Great Plains, I mean, this is something that's been in my wheelhouse, obviously, for my entire career. And I'm so happy to be, aligned with you guys and be able to have this interview and talk to you specifically, understanding more about you and the innovation. And some of this stuff is really new to me. I knew about robotics and whatnot, but not been necessarily inside the laboratory per se, and just kind of on the other side of things, working with patients and education. Really, really interesting. And I think the AI thing is important. I mean, the world is changing rapidly. There's going to be a tremendous amount of benefit that comes from this. And it's really cool to hear that you guys are really, I think, kind of leading the way in that with regards to the technology. Any final comments, Scott, before we wrap things up?
I don't think so, Kurt. I just really appreciate you having me on today. I know you're going to be speaking with a couple of other folks from Mosaic on upcoming podcasts. We do appreciate your leadership and the work that you do and have done with us to educate the masses on functional medicine and the benefits of it. So we really do appreciate being aligned with you and helping to spread the word along with you and your educational efforts. So I just want to thank you so much for that.
Well, I appreciate that, Scott. Well, thanks so much, and we will talk soon.
All right, Kurt. Take care. Thank you.
This episode of Functional Medicine Doc Talk was proudly sponsored by Mosaic Diagnostics, a global pioneer in specialty diagnostic testing whose mission is focused on restoring health by addressing the root cause of complex chronic disease. For more information about this podcast, go to functionalmedicinedoctalk.com.